Hey, everybody, we are back again. This is College Football Focus. We are still embroiled in our conference previews. And today we're going to look at the Big 12. This is the last of the power conference leagues that we're going to be covering. And we are joined today by Justin and Matt from Updog Sports. They're going to give their insights into the Big 12. Guys, how are you doing this evening?
Doing good. How
Doing
about
great.
Cool. So yeah, the Big 12, certainly, I think most people will agree, is certainly the most fun league out there. I mean, their games seem to go down to the wire every week. And I think that they're actually coming up in profile. Last season, the Big 12 was, I guess we can borrow a little bit from Stranger Things. It was the upside down. Utah and Oklahoma State were considered to be among the favorites, and Arizona State was sort of an afterthought. But neither the Utes nor the Cowboys had a winning record, while the Sun Devils had one of the best turnarounds in recent memory and fought tooth and nail before losing to Texas in the college football playoff. So just overall, what do you guys think are maybe some of the intriguing storylines for this season in the Big 12?
Well, when you look at a conference that usually performs really well, you want to look at quarterback play and returning production. And the Big 12 is really high in both of those categories. It may not be to the level of the 2023 Pac 12, but I'm seeing a lot of similarities here. Matt, what are some highlight topics you're thinking of over there?
I think there's going to be a lot of surprises. Like last year, we didn't expect BYU and Arizona State to be as high as they were. My thing is that this conference is so deep that all teams could probably finish within the top 75.
That would certainly be. I think that it would show the strength of the league, and I think when people are debating between the Big 12 and the ACC may have the one team in Clemson who is probably best equipped to really contend for the title, but I think there are probably three or four from the Big 12 that could certainly be in the talk for the playoff. I just think top to bottom. I did my power rankings about a week and a half ago, and the Big 12 came out slightly ahead. So I think that most people would probably agree that it's probably the better league of the I guess bottom two, since the SEC and Big Ten are a little bit ahead. So anyway, let's kind of get on to the teams. First one is going to be the Arizona Wildcats. They were supposed to contend last year. I was actually very high on them with Tent McMillan and Noah Fafita coming back, but it just did not happen. I mean, they only got to 5 wins, but Fafita being back for a third year, I think, should be a plus. And Brent Brennan got a lot of guys in the portal who seem to fit what he wants to do. So I think that they will be at least angling for a bowl game and maybe a little beyond. What's the thought on Arizona?
I think Arizona is kind of a little bit underrated. I think a lot of people were in the same boat as you and I and Matt as well, where we were very high on them entering last year. It did not pan out the way that we thought. And now this offseason, it's kind of time to just bury them, forget about them, move on, just assign them to the bottom of the Big 12. But that may not quite be the case. A lot of returning production, like you said, a very, very good portal class where they have a lot of intriguing guys who are coming in from, I mean, we got the running back from Texas State. I don't want to try to pronounce his name right now because I'll probably butcher it.
Ismail Mahdi.
Ooh, yes, there you go. Great stuff. Yeah, we have Song out of New Mexico at receiver, who's going to be really good. And he just leads a group of receivers in there. They were very intentional about who they brought in to try to address as many of their weaknesses as possible. The one that I'm not entirely optimistic they addressed well was the offensive line. That one's
Right.
going to need to come together a little bit. That will make or break their season. And then my other challenge with them is you look at the schedule, especially in the Big 12. You have the opener against Hawaii, who may be somewhat challenging. You never count the Bows. You have Weber State, but then once you get past those two games, you basically have a 10-game Big 12 schedule here,
Mm-hmm.
and you just can't find a stretch where they're going to string together wins. That's my hard part with them. I do think they'll be a factor. They'll definitely get in someone's way. But in terms of stringing together wins, I'm kind of struggling to find that. Matt, any other closing thoughts here on Arizona?
Well, they're sixth in transfer ranking. They are returning 70% production on offense, so that's going to be really helpful. Maybe they're the 2021 Bengals. Maybe they can just use their weapons and get ahead of everybody. But yeah, I don't, like you said, I don't see a stretch where they can definitively win these games. It's a coin flip going through the conference play, but 2-7, isn't it, for them?
Yeah, and that's really, I mean, that's how Arizona State got rolling last year. They strung a couple together, then they started believing, and then they started believing, and it just sort of snowballed. So if for some reason Arizona can find a couple or three where maybe they pull an upset somewhere, it's like, hey, maybe we can get this thing going. But yeah, you're right. It's all about momentum for a team like Arizona, especially if they want to get past the 5-win mark that they had last year. Arizona State, obviously, everyone knows the job that Kenny Dillingham did. I love the hire. I thought they were a year away. He obviously proved me and everybody else wrong. They arrived a year ahead of schedule. It is going to be interesting to see how they do with expectations. I mean, certainly it's easier to come out of the weeds and do something when no one is really gearing up for you. But I think with expectations, it'll be interesting to see how they respond. I love Sam Levitt and Jordan Tyson, a great pitch and catch combo. Defense is going to be anchored by a physical trench group, but they may need, and the secondary is good as well. But you look at that schedule, though. I mean, Baylor and Iowa State on the road and Texas Tech at home. That might be the only thing that trips them up, because I do think from a roster composition standpoint, they are probably a top 3 team in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do they do with that target on their back? They were the team getting after everyone else last year. Now everyone is looking at them on the schedule like, all right, guys, this is the team we need to beat. Again, though, like you said, Sam Levitt, Jordan Tyson, that's going to be an awesome combination. Kanye Udo at running back. He's a different threat than Cam Skattebo, but he's really going to help fill that need. And then I hope I don't say the name wrong, but Moss out of Fresno State, I believe is his name, is a really good pickup, a wide receiver. All right, I remembered that correctly. The question is, even if this year does not quite pan out to another college ball playoff berth, I want to ask both of you, do you think that Arizona State could eventually become the Big 12's alpha program?
If they play their cards
I definitely
right.
think so.
Yeah, if they play their cards right, they can be an elite Big 12 program. Couple closing thoughts on Arizona State. They're 4th in the country in offensive returning production, but they lost some big players on offense. So it'll be interesting who steps up. They do have a favorable first half of the schedule, so they can build momentum going into these big games. So I like that a lot. But 79% defensive returning production, I think that's key. You've got to be able to stop someone. This isn't the old Big 12 where they just give up on defense. I think that returning number there is going to be helpful for them.
Yeah, CJ Fight up front and Xavier Alford in the secondary. Those are 2 guys to really watch. I think that they could be guys who, if things pop right, they could maybe vie for some All-America honors. But yeah, Dillingham, he is very deliberate in recruiting. He has a type of player that he likes to bring in. They'll hit the portal if they need to fill in some needs, but they don't necessarily go overboard. Obviously, Kanye Udo was a need because Skattebo has gone to the NFL. So I think that they are a very fascinating team to watch, as we said, with the expectations on them. Another team that went into last season with expectation actually, 2 years ago, they were coming into with more expectation, but Baylor got better last year after the stumble of 2023. Dave Aranda was on the hot seat. He's safe now, and now he's got designs on the Big 12 title. They're another team. Ton of production back. They return most of the offensive line, which in this day and age is really a key metric. I don't think folks know how good Sawyer Robertson is at quarterback. You could make a case that he's the second best quarterback in the league, and maybe some might say that he's better than Sam Levitt. I think that that's an interesting debate people could have. It's funny to think that Baylor struggles on defense since that's Aranda's forte, and it could be average again. But if the offense elevates, then you know what? It may not matter what the defense does. They may be a team that can just outscore people.
Yeah, and Sawyer Robertson, again, like fitting that theme of really good quarterbacks here in the Big 12. He is set to take the next step, I think. The run game is really good. You know, like you said, the offensive line with that returning production, the running backs they have in the mix. I would like to see them get Michael Trigg, the tight end, a little bit more involved in the offense. I think he only caught like 30 passes last year, but he has the talent to do so much more. You get him as kind of like the safety blanket there for Robertson, kind of help him cut back on those interceptions a little bit. And all of a sudden, you've got an offense that's just going, and your defense just needs to come up with a few stops here and there, force some turnovers, and you're in a great spot. My one danger with Baylor is, of course, you need to be ready to start out the season hot because you got Auburn coming into town to start the year, SMU on the road. You could see where this season could careen off a cliff very quickly if they lose to Auburn in that opener at home.
Yeah, and not just SMU on the road, SMU on the road on the CW. So
yes,
like definitely interested in that game. Baylor, I got to watch them against UC either last year or 2 years ago, where it was last year because Sorsby ended up just shooting himself in the foot, and that's what Baylor lived on that game was turnovers. So if they can continue that, I think they'll be good. They just have to get through a rough patch in their schedule.
Yeah, and Bryson Washington is a kid I love. He's their all-purpose running back, and I mean he's dynamic. He's a kind of a home run threat, and I think that that's what makes Robertson so good is that teams can't just load up to stop the pass because Washington will make them pay if that happens. BYU touched on it earlier on that they were one of the teams along with Arizona State that kind of surprised some people. Year in, year out, they're usually one of the most physical teams in the league, and this year should be no different. Jake Retzlaff is back, but there are some key losses on defense. Tyler Batty up front, especially. That could knock them back a tick or two. And their schedule in October, Utah, Texas Tech, and Iowa State in succession. That to me is going to determine their trajectory. They can win all three, but they could lose all three. And so I think that they definitely are going to be another team that's going to, if they've got some momentum build up going into that first game against Utah, then I think that they're sitting pretty. But if they've been kind of inconsistent, then who knows what's going to happen with BYU.
Yeah, I love that defense a lot. It was a defense that does not pop when you watch them on TV, but I was at the Alamo Bowl at the end of December there, or yeah, it was the end of December, and seeing that defense in person, flying around the ball on every single play, those guys impress me. Like, they do not pop on TV, but they fly to the ball. They are tough. They are physical. And even though there's some turnover there, I am not too concerned about that. I just want to see what the offense looks like. I know there's some trouble around Retzlaff that we kind of have to see how that kind of sorts out.
Sure.
But running back CJ Martin, he's really good. They got their top receiver back. So, and if Retzlaff is back, I do think he's going to play better. It was kind of a buried headline that when he kind of struggled late in the year that he was dealing with a nagging injury. But this offense, if that goes, I think the rest of the team goes. But you do make a good point in the schedule. And I really want to dive, if I get a chance this offseason to dive into worst scheduling draws of the year, number one on the list will be BYU at Iowa State. Big 12, what are you doing with this? After the Holy War, which is going to take up a lot of this team's energy, you send them on the road to Ames the next week. And by the way, they haven't had a bye week since like September 13th at this point.
Right.
And Iowa State is also coming off a bye week. So I'm chalking that as a loss already because what are you doing, Big 12? You just handed BYU a loss. So they need to get through that. I think they can still reach the college football playoff with 2 losses, but that Iowa State game really makes the margin for error very slim. Matt, what are your thoughts?
So my thing is that by the time they get to that Utah game, by the time they get to the Holy War, they're bowl eligible. That's the expectation for them, because I mean they could very easily beat Colorado, West Virginia, and Arizona. Everything else kind of cupcake in their eyes. 69% returning production on offense. That's gonna be very helpful. My question is the defense. Yes, they are very well coached, but they didn't do well in the portal. They were okay in recruiting. So, like, what do we get defensively from them?
Yeah, I'm not quite as sold on the front as you are, Justin. Although I think that they're good. I love their linebackers though, Isaiah Glasker and Jack Kelly. Those two guys just fly around and they'll hit you. They're going to kind of be the heart and soul of the unit. So I think that they'll be okay on defense. Like I said, they're typically a physical team, and I don't think that is going to change. Cincinnati, this is a crucial year for Scott Satterfield, just 8-16 in 2 seasons. And we're going to learn a lot about them in week 1 when they face Nebraska. That is not really easing into the season or anything. The offense does return a lot. Brendan Sorsby should be more comfortable in his second year as a starter. And any team that has the Godfather, Dante Corleone, on the defense, in the middle of the defense, they're at least, they're going to be a tough team. They just need to have more guys step up and play along with him, because he is indeed a monster inside.
Well, I'm wearing the Cincinnati Bearcats Cotton Bowl shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Matt is our loyal Cincinnati representative here. Matt, I think I'll let you take the lead on this one.
So the expectation for UC is that Satterfield does enough to just not get fired. He proved that at Louisville. He recruits well, but just doesn't call plays very well. Little bit of an uptick last year. They do have a decent amount of production, returning production on both offense and defense, 65 on offense, 71 on defense. They're playing a home game in Kansas City. Think about that for a second. But they got a tough second half of the schedule. So if they do end up beating Nebraska, they've got to come to play and not get complacent by the end of the season if they want to do anything.
Yeah, they need another late season slide, because that's what we saw happen last year. Where, and I think Sorsby did a lot to hold up the offense. He didn't have the best receiving targets, and they hit the portal for that. There's no sure things out of the portal, so we'll see how that develops. Evan Pryor is going to be a playmaker in the run game, though. I do like that a lot.
Yes.
But the defense needs to stay healthy, and that's about. I'll pass it on to you now.
Yeah, Pryor is definitely a guy who can make some plays. He just kind of got caught up in a numbers game at Ohio State. I mean, obviously they saw talent, and I think when he played last year, we saw talent. He just kind of got washed out. If he can stay healthy, and if they can run the ball, I love the addition of Taron Tayo from Eastern Michigan on the offensive line. He's a guy who is, I think, a 2-time All-MAC selection. And he really is going to add some stability, because those inside runs, I think that is where he's a guy who could be a road grader. So usually offensive linemen don't get talked about a ton in the portal, but he is one to watch. I really was hoping that Ohio State would go after him, because he was a guy who was worthy of the attention. Colorado, speaking of fascinating, always in the spotlight. To me, though, this year's Colorado team, I think, is going to more closely resemble Deion's first team than one that builds on last year. How else can they? I mean, they lose Shedeur Sanders, they lose Travis Hunter, they lose a lot of important guys. And while he definitely has brought the talent quotient up, those are guys who have played for a number of years, and they were among the best in college football at their position. So equaling 9 wins after losing Shedeur and Hunter, to me, is a huge ask. And the schedule is a lot more difficult this year than it was last year, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how it goes, because Caden Salter is likely going to be the starting quarterback. I mean, Juju Lewis, the 5-star, is only 17 years old, so it's not likely he's ready to take the reins. Salter kind of gives you more of that running threat.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be kind of fascinating to see how that develops. The offensive line, I'm going to be bold here and say it may not be a weakness. With the returning production they have up there this year, it actually might finally begin to establish itself. Every single year before this, they were turning it over, bringing in new guys. Now they have at least like 3 set starters, I believe, coming back. So that's going to help there. Now they just need to find who the running back is going to be. Dallin Hayden is still there. He's a good dude. We'll see if the track hawk can maybe become a factor there. Receiver, I'm not too worried about because they were insanely deep at receiver. I was at the Kansas State game last year when Travis Hunter went down, Horn went down. I think even number 3 in the list went down. Like all these guys went down for injuries in that game. In the second half, when the guys that are going to need to step up this year, Draylon Miller, Omarion Miller, those guys were in the game, and they were still making plays against Kansas State secondary. Those guys are going to be a factor there. Defensively, I like the D-line. What is going to happen at linebacker? Linebacker is a big, big concern for me. But, yeah, you're right about the schedule. I think bowl eligibility is mostly the expectation here.
So there's not much for me to add to that. You guys kind of took everything. But the schedule's tough. Dion lives and dies by the transfer portal. Doesn't recruit overly well, but when he does, he gets solid skill position players that can really produce. And you have to remember, just 3 or 4 years ago, this team went 1-11. Didn't have Dion. He came in, just shook everything up, and then dropped a couple Mentos and Coke, and here we are, 9-4, looking at tougher season this year. But I mean, it's what he can do with the transfer portal. Salter is huge, though. Quarterback, biggest position. You got a great one.
Yeah, he's definitely he brings experience. I do think there are going to be packages for Juju Lewis. I think that he's probably too good to keep off the field. I think you're going to see Salter will get probably 80-85% of the snaps, but I think Lewis will get on the field because they got at some point this year they're going to have to kind of find out what they have in Lewis, and Lewis is going to be the guy next year. So I think you're going to see him, and I'm with you on the linebackers. If they don't find someone, it may be easy to run on Colorado. And if you're keeping the offense off the field, you're going to be able to beat them. So that's a team to me that is just kind of going to be a fascinating watch. Houston, year 2 of Willie Fritz. I think it's going to look a lot better than year 1. They were actually pretty competitive. They beat Kansas State. And they really looked like they were playing better at the end of the season. Fritz upgraded the roster by hitting the portal hard. But I think the offense is really going to need to take a step forward. And a lot of that is going to be contingent on the health of Connor Weigman, who they got in the transfer portal. If they want to take that next step, he's going to have to stay healthy. But I do think they have some pieces in place to be bowl eligible this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was very surprised at first that Willie Fritz shook up the offensive staff at first. But really diving more into it, I'm not surprised. Here's the reason why their offense can improve a lot. They were dead last in college football in red zone execution. Mm-hmm. I believe they got touchdowns in 8 of 25 red zone possessions. That is atrocious. That should be impossible to do. So just by default, that should be better. But then you add in the fact that some of these portal pickups are really good. Weigman has a lot of promise, and he's going to have receivers to work with there. The defense, we know, is going to be extremely salty once again. This team definitely looks like they can crash bowl eligibility and maybe even get in the way of a contender in the Big 12.
Yeah, I would agree with that. 68% returning production on offense. As long as they fix those red zone issues from last year, I think Weigman now has little to no expectation. When he was at Texas A&M, everything was on his shoulders. It was do or die for him. Now it's like, okay, you're new place, new face. Let's see what you can do. They got a fairly favorable schedule, if you can call that, in the Big 12. So, I mean, I agree with Justin. I think they can compete for one of the top few spots.
Yeah, I think, it's not going to resemble the Andre Ware teams that they were putting up 77 and 80 points in back in the 80s and 90s. But I do think Houston will be better this year, and I think they will be a fun watch. And I'm glad to see Willie Fritz getting some spotlight because he was always a great coach when he was at the Group of 5 level. Iowa State, Matt Campbell finally broke through the ceiling. Iowa State, I believe, was one of maybe 2 teams in the Power Conference that had never won 10 games. They won 11 last year, and they got double-digit victories. Rocco Beck, to me, is another guy who is criminally underrated at quarterback, kind of going back to the theme of all these good quarterbacks in the Big 12. But you got to temper it a little bit. They got to replace an awful lot of talent at receiver. They had 2 guys who went on to the NFL, and they're probably going to be a little bit tight end heavy early in the year as the new guys get in. But what they had been good at the previous years until last year, the ground game had always been pretty sound, but they could not run the ball last year, especially at crucial times. So I think on offense, that's going to need to pick up. And then on defense, they're going to need to create some pressure up front. And that has not happened probably going on 3 or 4 years now. So I think Iowa State is a team that they have expectations, and they're just another one of those blue-collar teams. But there are a couple of things that if they don't go right, they could take a step or 2 back.
Yeah, Iowa State's kind of that interesting Big 12 team. They're really hard to preview each year because they run a very gritty style, and they walk a very thin line between being good, having a good record and not having a good record.
Mm-hmm.
They one-score games are what this team lives on. If they're good in those games, like Rocco Beck last year came in the clutch, I believe, led them to 4 come from behind victories in the fourth quarter of games. So they need to repeat that performance to remain good. But at the same time, I do want to see the run game improve because they have good running backs. They have the backs to do it. They just need the execution to make it happen. I think Chase Sowell will from East Carolina was a good pickup to really help at receiver.
Yeah.
But you're right about the pass rush for sure. The pass rush is my biggest concern looking at this team. I'm intrigued by the linebackers just because they've had so many injuries at this position the last 2 years. They got all these guys healthy now. They have a lot of depth at least, but I'm very curious to see how they sort that out because they have a lot of guys with experience now there. And the schedule is not super forgiving. Like it's intriguing. Every game is winnable, but I also would argue that every game is also losable if they don't play their best ball.
Right.
I would agree with that, but I'm going to add to that. I think the reason why they're beatable, but they can lose those games is because they're facing tough defenses. So if they can't run the ball, they're not going to be able to just pull away. And Iowa State, when you think of Iowa State, other than the bird tornado that logo from 90s and 2000s, you'd think of running the football. And they didn't do a whole lot in the transfer portal, so they're relying on their returning production, which again isn't great. It's 58% average offense and defense. So I mean, if they can get past some of these tough defenses, I think they'll be okay. But they're going to rely on Rocco Beck a lot.
Yeah, and they're not a team, surprisingly, given their recent success. They still are in the lower half of the Big 12 in terms of recruiting as far as the ratings. But the thing that Matt Campbell does is he makes a lot of teams play their style. You take them out of their game and you play Iowa State's game, and that's when you get beat. So if teams can stick with their style and maybe use their superior athletes, then Iowa State could trip up a few times. But they've just been so good at getting down in the dirt, knocking you back, and running the ball. So I do think if the ground game picks up, you'll see the typical Iowa State production. Kansas, another team, kind of took a little bit of a backward step. Lance Leipold is another guy. I love him as a coach. And him coming in there, he changed the culture. They've been successful, but I don't think they've gotten quite to where they wanted. There was always a thought that if Jalen Daniels could play a full season, then Kansas would really pop. Well, Daniels did play 9 games. It was the first time in his career that he did that, but the offense ranked 52nd nationally. I mean, that's kind of middle of the pack. It's not terrible, but it's not great. The defense needs work, but I do love a guy on the edge, Dean Miller. He's a guy who can really create some havoc in opposing backfields. But to me, there's optimism stemming from the fact that Kansas lost 5 games by 6 points or fewer. Those things generally turn around the next season. So if you were involved in a lot of close wins, you may not be as lucky the next year. And if you were involved in a lot of close losses, I think that the football bounces a little bit different for you the next season.
Yeah, absolutely. Kansas is my surprise team of the Big 12. You look at last year, and when you watch them play, their offense seemed like it was in control. It was running the ball really well and everything like that. But then when it came to like key downs, red zone situations, they were just a tick off for most of the year. And then you get to November, all of a sudden they seem to have flipped the switch, beat 3 straight ranked teams. And well, then the Baylor game happened at the end there. But other than that, like I think what we saw in November is more of what we're going to see this year. Jalen Daniels is going to have his biggest year. I really like Highshaw running back. He's ready to step in for Devin Neal in that position. And I like the portal pickups at receiver and defense to really help them out. We know the offensive line is going to be really good. This is Lance Leipold team. So I really, and that turnover margin, I think they're going to turn that around as well. I really like Kansas to factor in the Big 12 championship race. That's one of my bold predictions for this conference.
Okay. I'm not as high on them as Justin is. I am pretty high on them though. They have a much more favorable schedule this year. They had a lot of returning production last year, not quite as much this year. They're 54%, 61 on offense, so that's going to be helpful. But I think it's going to come down to their schedule and coaching, and I think they can get it done. I think that Kansas is definitely a team to watch in the Big 12.
Yeah, they did have some bad injury luck last year too, and that's another thing that, I mean, some teams just hit it every year, but it seems that if you don't hit it every year, if you had a bad year with it, you stay healthy. I mean, Daniels finally did get to stay healthy, and we saw what he was able to do. Other part of the state, Kansas State, a lot of people I think are ticking them as the favorite for this year in the Big 12, and Chris Kleiman has been certainly continued what Bill Snyder had done and what had been going on at that program. Kansas State, another one of those blue collar programs. I don't think they got what they wanted out of Avery Johnson last year. He's very dynamic, but he barely completed 58% of his passes. He threw 10 interceptions, and he was kind of up and down from week to week. Now, that could have been because it was really his first true year as a starter, even though he played the year before when Will Howard was still there. But I think he needs to mature and grow as a player if they're going to send to the top of the league. But I will say their linebacker, Austin Romaine, one of my absolute favorite players in college football. That guy is a tackling machine, and that side of the ball is going to keep Kansas State in every game.
Yeah, and this is what they want to be. They want to be the smash mouth team. They're going to run the ball, and you're not going to be able to run the ball. That's the style they want to do. And that's probably why, even though they won't be the highest ranked Big 12 team in preseason polls, it's why it seems Vegas has tabbed them as the favorite. But you're right, though. It does hinge on Avery Johnson's shoulders. I will say, like, he is a good player, but it's time for him to become a good quarterback. And they bolster the receiver position with a lot of experienced guys in the transfer portal to help him out with that. Dylan Edwards is going to bring a lot of big plays in the run game. There is a little bit more replacements there on the offensive line than we would normally expect, but I still fully expect them to be bigger and stronger than most of their competition. So it'll be very interesting to see how this team goes. But like you said, though, Avery Johnson, the main thing is for him just to clean it up with the turnovers, the mistakes. Like, we cannot have him running 30 yards backwards and giving up a safety against Iowa State in the opener this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sound like a broken record here. It all hinges upon Avery Johnson. I mean, they didn't really hit the portal too hard. They didn't rank highly in that. They didn't rank highly in recruiting the past few years. So when it comes down to, can they keep this thing going? Can they get ahead and make stops? So yeah, they don't have the most favorable schedule either. So outside of conference play, they had add Army to that. So they got a little bit of a tough stretch there.
Yeah, their blueprint is a lot like Iowa State. They have the guys they have, and they have a culture, and they play a certain way, and a lot of the time it works. Last year, it was a little bit subpar. I think that they're hoping to get back to that. Oklahoma State, I think a lot of people in the season that Florida State had, I think overlooked just how much of an unmitigated disaster Oklahoma State was last year. They won 10 games in 2023. They came in as a team to really watch. Some people were saying even flirting with the top 10, but man, did the bottom drop out. And there does not look to be that much star power on hand to turn things around to me. But you know what? Maybe that's what Mike Gundy needs. I know early in his career when Oklahoma State would surprise people, it was in years when no one expected anything. And I really don't think that there's a lot of people outside of Stillwater who expect a lot to happen. So maybe lightning strikes and they do something. But I'm looking at their schedule and looking at their roster, and I'm thinking, where are a lot of wins to get them to a bowl game?
Yeah, it was a very fascinating drop off because it wasn't like Florida State was where you had a few question marks there. There's a few risks with Florida State. You looked at Oklahoma State and you saw the offensive line that played so well the year before returning and everything like that. And everyone just collectively dropped off. So where do you go from here? No one knows, but I think everyone's view of Oklahoma State this year is going to be the same thing. Like, do you trust Gundy to continue to do what he does and find good seasons out of nowhere? Because that's possible. I like that they already have a set quarterback. That's going to be helpful for them. And clearly it seems like the staff around him needed a rejuvenation. So I'm glad to see that. But yeah, overall, like you said, there's just when I look at the roster, there's not a lot of known commodities here. You're really hoping for guys to step up out of the blue and become playmakers for this team.
Yeah, it's all doom and gloom in Stillwater. I mean, they're not gonna pull off any miracles like the Oklahoma City Thunder did the other night. Like they're a team from Oklahoma that's gonna live and die by the coin flip on the schedule, and I don't see a whole lot of positivity here.
Well, and their best defensive player, Kendall Daniels, went to Oklahoma. So, I mean, he was one of their few known commodities in the secondary, and he left. So, yeah, it's gonna be really really interesting to watch how Gundy kind of recalibrates and does everything. TCU, another team that to me they're kind of hard to guess what they're going to be. They might be the toughest team. The talent to me is solid, but man, there's another one. Schedule is really daunting. They're going to go as far as Josh Hoover takes them, and he's another one. We've mentioned Sawyer Robertson. We've mentioned Sam Levitt. We've mentioned a lot of guys. Josh Hoover is right there in that upper echelon of quarterbacks in the Big 12. They really need to find a job of stopping the run. When Gary Patterson was there, you knew the defense was going to be nails and just frustrate everybody, but they were far too easy to run on last year. And if they don't get that shored up, then I think that they could have a year that falls short of expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. And even on the offensive side, if you can't stop the run or run the ball, usually you're in trouble. And that's what this team looks like right now on paper. They did not run the ball well last year, and it all was on Josh Hoover's shoulders. It's not a sustainable. It doesn't matter how good he is.
Right.
It's not a sustainable move to have him throw the ball 60 times a game because he can't run it at all. You need to find a ground game somewhere in here, especially when you look at the schedule. They challenge themselves in the non-conference with headliners against North Carolina and SMU. And then they drew pretty much every contender out of the Big 12. So they need to figure that out and figure it out fast. I do like a lot of what they have, though. Like, offensive line does a good job in pass protection. And they need to figure out how to carve out run lanes. I always find that weird when an offensive line is good at one thing but not the other. But yeah, that's what they need to figure out is kind of the defensive side and that run game.
They've one thing they've done well the past few years is they've recruited really well. They took
Mhm.
that national championship run and they recruited off of that. So they built everything in house. They didn't hit the portal too hard. They got okay returning production mainly on offense. Um, so when you look at it, it's how did they recruit? Did they hit? Did they miss? That's what we're going to be looking at. And like you guys said, the schedule's daunting. I mean, North Carolina, we don't know what we're going to get with Bill Belichick, so we're going to see something brand new from them. SMU going to be a contender. Most of the Big 12 contenders are on here, so I mean, we could see TCU from a couple years ago. We could see a little less than that.
Yeah, definitely. Bud Clark is a guy I really love, though, in their secondary. He's a hitter. He can intercept. He's probably going to be the leader. And I think that if the defense does improve, um, it's because he's a veteran presence and he will get some of the younger guys up front to play well. Texas Tech, they are kind of the darling, the team that is laying in the weeds. They finally made a commitment to NIL. It's unlimited now, and they did a great job in the transfer portal. They're kind of a chic pick to win the league. Quentin Joyner comes over at running back from USC. David Bailey comes over at edge from Stanford. Lee Hunter from UCF on the inside of the defensive line. They might have the best roster in the conference. Baron Morton at quarterback obviously is very good. Caleb Douglas at receiver is a guy that doesn't get a lot of national headlines, but probably should. But here's another one. Schedule has Utah, Arizona State, and Kansas State away. And so they're going to need to win two of those to probably stay in the hunt. But you know what? I'm buying. And there's always a team that wrecks me every year. This might be it, but I just like the way they look. I like what Joey McGuire has done. He's got a great relationship with the Texas high school coaches. And I think that this might be Texas Tech's year to kind of upset the apple cart a little bit.
Yeah, it really feels like a huge breakthrough potential year for them. I really like this roster just like you do. I know it definitely hinges on Baron Morton staying healthy. He is a gunslinger when he does play, but we've seen him get hurt a little too often. I would like to see him, spend a whole season healthy. Unlimited receivers to throw to. He has so many weapons. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I like what they did to address the defense. But the schedule is, of course, one of the biggest concerns. That road game in Utah is the one that's really red alert for me because it fits exactly what Texas Tech has done. Those what are they doing games that Texas Tech has lost the last 2 years, where it's that first road game of the year on the road in an unfamiliar environment. We saw that with the Wyoming game 2 years ago, Washington State last year. Now Utah kind of fits the mold of that kind of game. So that one is a red alert for me. They also play at Arizona State and Kansas State. I'm trying to remember what the stat was. I think it's been since like 2011 since they won there. So that's
they have
problematic
trouble
as
beating
well.
Kansas State.
So yeah, that's where my concern is for them. But no, we've been all in over here too. We like Texas Tech to crash the playoff.
Yeah, I'm really high on Texas Tech. I mean, they're returning production 82% on defense. They not only return all that production, they actually go out and address every need. Corner, linebacker, defensive tackle, edge rusher. They got some guys that they brought in to kind of beef up that defense even more. And then offensively, they didn't return a ton, but then, like you said, they get Quentin Joyner. They bring in Micah Hudson, who's very underrated receiver from Texas A&M. They bring in two offensive linemen. Yeah, brought back. My bad. Howard Sampson from North Carolina is actually one of my favorites that they brought in because he was highly recruited out of high school, and they bring him in to play. I think left tackle is what they said, but like they got a lot going for them. And Justin, to kind of negate what you said, I don't see that Utah game as much of a trap game because usually those trap games that Texas Tech gets, they get a big player the week after that they're looking ahead to. I'm not seeing Houston as that big player that they have to practice for. Usually they get like an Arizona State or someone like that, like last year's Arizona State. This year, I think it's pretty favorable how the schedule is set up for them, and I think they can crash a playoff.
Yeah, I'm probably as high on them as a lot of people. And after we have our preview magazine come out on July 7th, my rankings are a little bit different because it was a conglomeration of everybody on the staff. Mine are a little different, and I think people are going to be surprised how high I have Texas Tech. So after July 7th, people watch the Twitter, and you will see your mouth might drop open a little bit to see how high Texas Tech is. UCF, Scott Frost 2.0. You got to wonder what's going to happen here. Is he going to be able to get them back to the heights of 2017 when they went undefeated? Well, certainly not this year. I mean, there's a lot of question marks about the quarterback situation. They've got a lot of guys, but not a lot of guys who have played. The offensive line has undergone a massive overhaul. So I do think the offense is going to struggle. The defense does have some pieces, and they added through the portal, but they face BYU, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Kansas State all on the road. So I think this year is going to be a bumpy season, but I do think because of his familiarity and the blueprint that he had for success before, I think long term this is a good hire, but I think this year this is going to be a team that struggles.
Yeah, absolutely. They're really all in on the redemption arc here with this one, because bringing in Scott Frost, and then he brought in Alex Grinch, which was a curious hire at defensive coordinator.
Anytime anyone brings in Alex Grinch, it's a curious hire.
Exactly. Oh my! Every single time I think of him, I still think of the story with when he was with Mike Leach, and they had half of the defense wearing one set of headsets and half the defense wearing the other set. So Cooper Kupp kept getting wide open because half the defense is running the wrong play. Yeah, there's not a lot of obvious wins on the schedule too. I think Jackson could solve the quarterback situation. And sorry, I kind of jumped on two different talking points there at the same time, but Jackson performed admirably for Indiana last year when he had to step in for Rourke. So I think he at least kind of solidifies that, but there's really just not a whole lot of other pieces I feel safe about here. And then, like you said, the schedule's really tough. There's not a whole lot of wins that I can point out here. There's a few non-conference games they could probably open 2-0. They have the space game against Houston. We know how the space games go, so maybe they get another one there. But other than that, I have a hard time finding wins for them.
Yeah, I agree. They have, and one thing I do want to say is I really want to see KJ Jefferson do something well. Seems like every team he gets on, they don't have a whole lot to offer him.
Well, maybe he'll do something in the UFL, buddy, because he's not in college anymore.
Maybe. No, he's showing on their roster still on ESPN.
Really?
So I don't know what that's about. But 45% total returning production. That's terrible. But they did hit the portal pretty hard, so they're trying to redo things. Maybe they have a Colorado dream year, but like you guys said, there's not much to offer on this schedule other than like North Carolina A&T.
Yeah, I do think that because they're in such a fertile recruiting state, I do think he's going to hit recruiting hard. And over the next couple of seasons, you're going to see them increase the talent base to where they're probably a top 5 roster in the league. It just isn't going to be this year. Utah, I am about the biggest Kyle Whittingham fan in the world. I always think when I see him on coach lists like at 12, 13, 14, I want to stand up and just slap that person, because I just think, considering that Utah is not in a fertile recruiting area and they don't go out and get the 4 and 5 star guys, they typically punch above their weight every year. Now, last year, obviously, it didn't happen. Cam Rising got hurt again, and I think it's official. I think he is finally done. I think I saw the announcement recently, and not wishing him bad. The program, I think, needs to be able to move forward because he was always getting hurt. But Whittingham, he's too good a coach to let them stay down long. Don't be surprised if they get back into contention this year. I love Devon Dampier at New Mexico. He adds some punch to the offense, and Wayshawn Parker if you weren't in the Pacific Northwest, you probably don't know who he is, but he was a really, really productive guy at Washington State. The defense is its typical unit. I mean, they've got Lander Barton at linebacker. They've got a good secondary. I think the defense is going to set the tone for a season that, to me, screams resurgence. Now, whether it's resurgence enough to get one of the two spots for the title game, I don't know, but I would be really surprised if this is another bad year in Utah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think they've gone under the radar in the Big 12 a little bit. But the one thing I look at with them is those big men in the trenches.
Yes.
Bigger, meatier men.
Spencer Fenno.
Yeah. They have two potential first-round picks on the offensive line. And the defensive line also, once again, is going to be loaded with talent. I think the defense just kind of wore out late in the year when the offense couldn't produce thanks to the Cam Rising experience. I do feel bad for the kid because he's a good dude, I've heard. It sucks that he could never stay healthy. But for Utah, it's healthy to move on at this point because, Dampier was a huge pickup. It's going to be really fun to see what he can add to the run game. And we know Utah's going to have really good backs as well. And the transfer portal helps out receiver. You look at the schedule, they have that opener against UCLA, but I think they can really just bully those guys in the trenches. Mm-hmm. And once you get past that, you've got, outside of a weird trip to Laramie, you got some home games. You get West Virginia early in the year. We'll touch on why I'm thinking that's a huge key in the moment. I like a lot of what the schedule has to offer. It comes down to the Holy War and that game at Baylor, really, that'll kind of decide whether this is just a good rebound year or we're going to the playoff rebound year.
Yeah, I am pretty high on Utah. I do think they missed their window of magic, but they have 72% returning production on offense. That's going to be huge for them. Favorable early, favorable late. They just got a big meaty stretch. I feel like that West Virginia game is a trap game because it comes right after Texas Tech, right before Arizona State and the Holy War. So I feel like West Virginia would be a good trap game for them. So if they can squeak out a few wins in that stretch, I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, especially teams traveling across the country like that.
Yeah.
You can watch West Virginia make that a noon start too. So it'll be like 10 a.m. for Utah. So that will be interesting. And speaking of West Virginia, Rich Rod has come home. They welcomed the prodigal son home. So what do we expect from West Virginia? Well, his last 6 West Virginia squads won nearly 60 games. And he's proven he can win at this level and at this school. Now, they may need to rely on the element of surprise due to having one of the lowest returning production figures in college football. But Jaheim White is a guy that is ready to shoulder the load in the backfield. Dude is a player. He has a nose for the end zone, and I think he's going to have a fantastic season. And the schedule is not the worst in the world. This is not a terrible time for Rich Rod to be coming in and kind of turning things over because the schedule does have some winnable games, including the game that you guys touched on, possibly the trap game for Utah.
Yeah, this is a fascinating team to me. I think it's going to take a little bit of time just because they brought in a ton of transfers. There's going to be some guys who are ready to go right away from the portal, like Vaughn knows this offense. He's going to be a dynamic receiver for them, but they need to figure out for sure who the quarterback is. I think we have a good idea, but that competition's still open. But the thing is, we've seen it kind of a trend with his Jacksonville State teams, even where they kind of started out slow, and then at the end of the year, they became run in your face, menace to play. And we could see something similar here, just with the new pieces on this team. West Virginia may start out pretty bad. They may struggle a lot. They may even lose like a game like at Ohio, where everyone's like, oh no, what's going on here? And then you turn the calendar to November, and all of a sudden, this team may be a team that no one wants to play. I think by November, he's going to have the pieces together, and we could see West Virginia really hurt the Big 12's multi-bid chances here because you see some of these key contenders they play. They play TCU, Arizona State, and Texas Tech all in November. We could see run like we saw with Kansas last year, where they pull it together in November and just create chaos in this chaotic conference.
Well, we've been seeing that with teams that are heavy in the transfer portal, especially ones that bring in starters. That takes some time for the chemistry to mesh. And then by the time we hit midseason, they're full stride, just knocking teams off, and they come out of nowhere. I think West Virginia is going to be one of those teams that we're going to look at and be like, wow, they pulled a Deion Sanders and they brought in a big name coach that did happen to be there before, but hit the portal really hard, come out slow, and leave swinging.
Yeah, I'm actually going to try to go to that Ohio-West Virginia game because Ohio State plays Grambling that week. Why would I want to watch that? Have not been to Athens in a number of years. It's just such a great setting at Peden Stadium. And I think if people don't know how good Ohio U is going to be, I think that's a sneaky, sneaky good game. And when I saw Power against Group of Five at home for the Group of Five, that's one that I have circled. All right, so that is all of the teams. Now we move on to true false. 5 questions, fairly simple true false answers. First one, right out of the chute. The Big 12 will have more than one CFP participant. True or false?
True.
I'm going to go false.
I am also going to say it's true. And when we give our wrap up near the end, you'll see just how many I think are kind of in the mix. Question 2. This is Deion's final season at Colorado.
Matt, I'll let you answer.
I'm going to go false.
I think that I think right after the season, when he knew that Shedeur and Travis were gone, I think he was thinking about it. But I think recently, some of the interviews I've seen, I do think that he is going to stick around. I thought when the hire happened, he was 3 years, 4 at max before he would move on to the NFL. But maybe he doesn't really want to go to the NFL, or maybe he wants to see how Shedeur does in year 1 before he decides to hitch his wagon to the NFL. So I also think it's false. Justin, what was your answer?
Oh, I was going to skip this question.
Okay.
We got too much skin in the game with Colorado.
Okay. Third question. This year's Arizona State in the Big 12 is Utah.
I'll go true. You know what? I'm all in. Give me the Utes.
I will echo that and go true.
I hope so, because I want to be on the Kyle Whittingham bandwagon again. So, the best Texas team in the Big 12 resides in Lubbock.
Yeah, I'll go true with that one.
Again, echoing it true.
I knew Matt was going to go on that
one. And then we kind of touched on this a little bit in the intro. It's a little bit different. The Big 12 is the most competitive power conference top to bottom in 2025.
Oh, that is a resounding true. No hesitation.
That is so true, and that answers my first question as to one team going to the college football playoff. They're so competitive that I do think that only one team gets in.
And that could happen, but when I look around, I don't see a second team from the ACC, and I don't know. Everyone's talking about the SEC is going to get 5, maybe get 6. That's a league that at the top is going to cannibalize itself, and I think that they're going to be maybe left with 4. So if you have 4 from there, 4 from the Big 10, maybe even 3 from the Big 10, and 1 from the ACC, I don't think you're going to have any more than 2 from the Group of 5 and then throw in Notre Dame. I think almost by default, but you make a good point that if everyone's just eating everybody up, 2 losses here, 3 losses here, then it certainly is a possibility. Moving on now to the Big 12 title game. I've read a lot of stuff. I've probably seen 7 or 8 different combinations of teams that people have had in the Big 12 championship game. I will lead off on this one. I think it's going to be a rematch of that midseason game, Arizona State and Texas Tech, and I think Texas Tech comes out ahead.
This is where my bold prediction comes in. I am going to go with Arizona State versus Kansas. I think the Jayhawks make a run here, but ultimately Arizona State comes out with the win.
I am going to go against the grain. I'm going to go Texas Tech versus Kansas. I was back and forth between BYU and Kansas, but Justin, there are long conversations of the Big 12 because I think our third talking point about this. I think you've swayed me on Kansas.
They're definitely a team. If they were to make it, I would not be the least bit shocked. I just think that, again, it's going to come down to the health of Jalen Daniels. But the ingredients are there. They certainly have the talent to do that. Last but not least, participants in the college football playoff. I would not be shocked if the Big 12 actually gets 3. I think Texas Tech is, I don't want to say lead pipe cinch just because there are some tough games on the schedule, but I think they and Arizona State are probably roster-wise the 2 best teams in the league. I think you could get a third one in either Iowa State or BYU. Iowa State might be on the outside looking in just because they are at a bit of a talent deficit, but they do play that one way. But if Jake Retzlaff plays and if BYU does find something up front, I think that they're a team that could be reckoned with. Kansas State could contend. I'm not sold on Avery Johnson yet, and that schedule is tough. So I'm going to say Arizona State, Texas Tech, and either Iowa State or BYU.
I'm going to go with 2 on this one. Arizona State, like I said. And then, Kansas, I think Kansas kind of takes the back seat here thanks to making the Big 12 championship. They miss out. Utah gets in instead.
Oh, okay.
I just have Texas Tech. I mean, I'm so high on them that they're my only team, but I don't have any faith in the college football playoff committee. Sankey and Petiti are going to try to get all their teams in and just try to screw over everybody else.
Yeah, and that's going to
go ahead. I got to look at it this way too. The one concern for the Big 12 and getting multiple bids, why it's kind of a bold prediction to say this, is because we did see this from the committee last year. They didn't even watch the Big 12 enough to know that when Arizona State lost to Cincinnati, they had Jeff Sims starting at quarterback. I don't believe they knew that.
Yeah, and I do think that whatever model they decide to choose, the CFP, whether it's the 4-4-2-2, whatever, or the 5+11, I do think eventually that will help the Big 12, but you guys make a good point. We saw it last year. Arizona State was a standout team, but they did get seeded low because of that loss with Jeff Sims. So I do think their margin for error is a lot lower than it is for the SEC and the Big 10. Maybe a second loss disqualifies a team if you're from the Big 12 because they're going to expect perfection out of the ACC and out of the Big 12. Different standards for the big 2 leagues and the other 2 leagues. Anyway, well, that was great. Great tossing that around. Interesting debate. If people want to find you guys on social media, shout out your socials so that they can do that.
At Updog Sports Talk on everything. X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok. You can even find us like YouTube Music, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're everywhere. Reddit.
We're
and
on
are you guys
Reddit
on?
too,
Are you guys on Substack too?
I guess that's one that we're not on.
Okay, but yeah, it's you guys definitely inundate the market. So if people say they can't find you, they're lying because they're not looking. Because as he said, you are everywhere. Well, that's it for today. Again, guys, thanks for joining me. Maybe we will catch up during the season. Maybe see how the Big 12 goes and a few others. For people who are watching on YouTube, please punch the like and subscribe button. And for those of you listening to the podcast, subscribe on whichever platform you get your podcasts. We will be back on Friday when we begin our look at the Group of 5 conferences. Later, everybody.